But here's the reality. The only thing that is guaranteed with employment is that it will fail. You are either going to retire with not enough money because nobody has ever saved their way to wealth, you're going to get fired, or you're going to die. That's it. There's your only three options, and none of them are success.
Episode of the Sharpening Report. I am your host, Sam Johnston, and we have a lot of business to get to, and I use that word business very intentionally. As today as Christians, we are often afraid of the word money. We're afraid to talk about it. We're afraid to use it. And most importantly, we're afraid to understand it and what it really means to be a Christian and how to use our gifts and to be stewards of the economy, really. And so today, to better understand that concept of money, we are joined by Mr. Josh Tolley. Mr. Tolley is radio host, he is a speaker, he is author of great books like the Evangelpreneur, which really gets down to the idea of what money is and how we were supposed to use it, and it's essential if you want to live a life understanding money and not be miserable. So I would suggest you go pick it up. With that being said, Mr. Tolley, how are you doing today?
Oh, Sam, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, sir.
Oh, it's a joy. Well, Josh, before we get started and before we start talking about your book, can we get a little bit of a background on who you are and where you came from and how you ended up being on the forefront of Christian monetary systems?
Sure. So my history was when I graduated school, I was functionally illiterate. I read at, I think, a second or a third grade level. I was extremely shy. I couldn't order a hamburger from McDonald's or answer the phone if it rang. But I knew I needed to be an entrepreneur because one of the things I discovered is when you're learning how to read, they tell you to read magazines because they're written at a sixth grade level. And I was reading the Forbes 400, and it's the 400 wealthiest people in the country, and I noticed all of them had one thing in common. None of them had a job. And I thought, okay, well, it's not my goal to be on the list, that's not the important thing, but it certainly is an indicator of what works financially and what doesn't. With 300 million people in the country, you would think somebody by fluke chance, if they were an employee, would end up on the list, yet here we were and nada. So I started thinking, okay, well, I need to be an entrepreneur then because it's more than just the money. It's about control of time, too, because really we only have time, people, and money. That's all we have. That's what we control. So I started my first business 3 days after high school, and it failed. I started my second business, and it failed. But by the time I got to business 3 and 4, I started actually getting pretty good at this thing. I got over the being shyness. And I remember I was not a believer at the time, but I was sitting across the table from a couple that were. And they had a couple kids. They were in their mid-30s. And I got their business to a point where they could quit. They could retire, at least one of them. And they both started crying. And I said, "What are you crying for?" And they said, "We've been praying for something. We had been praying for something to change. We knew God had more for us than just go to work, go home, go to work, go home, go to work, go home." So I thought at that point, well, maybe other people are feeling this same way. And I started teaching businesses across the country, and that just kind of grew into what it is today. And my first book, Quit Your Job or Die, I looked at how dangerous employment actually is, just from a danger level, not necessarily a biblical level, but just from a danger level. You are more likely to have a heart attack between 6 and 10 a.m. on Monday morning than any other day of the week. The number one trigger for any sort of chronic disease, whether it's rheumatoid arthritis or it's cancer or it's fibromyalgia, is stress. The number one cause of stress is finances. Suicide now takes more lives than traffic fatalities. Number one cause of suicide is financial stress. When you look at the divorce rate, it's 50 to 60%. The number one cause of divorce is financial stress. And here's the funny thing about that. They say it's communication, sex, and then money. But if you look at it, the average that a family spends alone together is only 39 minutes a day. And then if you take out kids, you're down to 19 minutes between husband and spouse. So how are you supposed to have good communication and a good love life with only 19 minutes? So the reality is the top 3 reasons are employment, employment, employment. So I started looking at how dangerous employment is, the rise of teen pregnancy and drug use in homes where 2 people are working. So I wrote that book, and that went out there, and I became a believer about 20 years ago now. And at the time, or even today for that matter, you go to the Christian bookshelf, and what do you see in terms of finances? You have a little bit on stewardship. You have a little bit of that weird prosperity gospel where, say oogada boogada 12 times and become a millionaire. And then you have a little bit about getting out of debt and making over your money. But the reality is there's no real good instruction because all of those are just terrible without context. So I knew that there was a place for Evangelpreneur, and that's why I wrote Evangelpreneur. And I think that's why it's been number 1 on Amazon 3 times now. It's because it's resonating with people, and it's not doing one of these, become a billionaire. It's just, what did the gospel say about money?
Yeah, absolutely. And your mentality when it comes to really life in general is inspiring. I had the opportunity to meet you at Hear the Watchman. It was just a real quick introduction.
Yep.
And so afterwards I met a lot of people at Hear the Watchman. I kind of just sent emails saying, hey, it was nice to meet you. And I was trying to put together this idea, and usually either people didn't respond to my emails or they said, oh, I'll pray for you. And that was great. And praying is awesome. And I don't want to diminish that at all. But your response was very unique. And you said, well, we teach this business class in Wisconsin. I really strongly urge to go to that. And that's how I can help you. And I was like, well, I can't really afford it, but I appreciate it. He's like, well, and then you were like, well, we don't really want to work with people who just give up that easy. And I was like, wow, like that is so true. We don't, like, that's not what I'm supposed to be doing. We need to really advance ourselves and don't just give up because, I don't have money. Like, that's such a lame excuse. And so that really inspired me. And it was such a unique response to what I had been receiving previously. So I guess, can we speak on that mentality of people who just kind of give up when they don't have the resources at hand? Like, what do you say to those people?
Well, I said, we're not supposed to give up that easy. And with Christians, it even offends me a little bit more. And what's interesting is I'm sure some viewer just felt offended. Like, oh, he would say that? I'm so offended. Actually, I'm offended that you, who are a believer in God, the creator of all resource, tell me I can't go. That's ridiculous. And it's also why we created an online university, which is only $12.50 an episode. So nobody has an excuse. But the reality here, Sam, is Christianity has become so wussified. We have become this milquetoast, limp-wristed, I just want to feel, what I say is modern Christianity has become the safe space for conservatives. We yell at the millennials on college campuses that are liberals having safe spaces, but the reality is that Christianity has become a safe space for the emotionally weak on the conservative side, and that's not what it's supposed to be. We're supposed to be the charge the hill or die trying sort of people. We're supposed to be the hang me upside down, crucify me upside down because I'm not even worthy of dying like Christ. And instead, we're I just don't know. I don't think money's important. And I'm working for 40 hours for money, but then I'm not going to have enough. The reality is that right now in America, 1 in 2 people don't have $500. Now, I'm not saying you're immoral if you don't have $500. That's not the point. But my point is, if you're over the age of 21 and you don't have $500, can we just admit that something is wrong? You're not being proficient with what God has given you. You're being a terrible steward, as a matter of fact. Because if you're going to work for 40 hours a week, 20 years of your life, or 40 years of your life, whatever it happens to be, and you don't have $500, you are being a bad steward of the talents and abilities that God has given you. So that's something that we have to answer for. And this excusing it away, well, money's not important. Fine, then don't go to work. then take that vow of poverty and be a hermit. And that's fine. But do not tell me money's not important and then leave your family, your wife, your husband, your kids, your health, and go make money. Because at that point, you're what the Bible calls a hypocrite.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's such this huge disdain towards money in the Christian world. And then they're always like, money is the root of all evil. And then you're like, well, did you even read scripture? Because that's not what it says. And that's not what it means. It's talking about the love of money. And there's been lots of shows on that. So we don't really necessarily need to go down that road. But in your book, you talk about the lies of Satan and how he changes things to make it sound like it's good. Like, for example, I don't want to live my life for money, and so you don't think about money. I was like, that's not really what we're talking about. But one huge lie or I guess let's start here. One quote that I love from your book was, the devil would have you keep believing a lie because it keeps you from trying and succeeding. And so that speaks so much to Christians who are just afraid to step out and afraid to try, and they're afraid to fail. So what would you say to someone who says, I'm afraid to fail. I'm afraid to step out?
Well, there's a lot to say about that. First, you're not given a spirit of fear. So there's that. Second, God is supposed to be with you, right? He says, I'll never abandon you. 3, he's a light unto your feet. 4, you're supposed to walk by faith and not by sight. There's no scripture that says, well, be afraid of failure, and thus give up, and thus beeth rewardeth in heaven. That scripture doesn't exist. So just from a faith standpoint, we start to have a theological problem here, and we have to do a gut check and ask ourselves, are we really God's people, or are we just kind of hoping he lets us in? Because if you are really God's people, then there is no fear of failure. Second, if you fail, so what? See, here's the thing. A toddler, when they learn to walk, falls down over 100 times a day. Does the toddler say, oh, well, I failed once, I better give up, I'll just crawl for the rest of my life? For some reason, as adults, we have determined that failure is so embarrassing that we don't even want to try, because it's not that painful. But here's the reality. The only thing that is guaranteed with employment is that it will fail. You are either going to retire with not enough money because nobody has ever saved their way to wealth, you're going to get fired, or you're going to die. That's it. There's your only 3 options, and none of them are success. Which is why the Banking Association of America says that you have a 98% chance of being dead or broke by your 65th birthday, and it's also why only 1 in 2 people even have $500. So if we're really afraid to fail, we would get out of our employment tomorrow, because it's not really paying the bills. It's not really putting bread on the table. It's not putting a roof over our head. So we need to realize that it's not working. And in America today, we're just refusing to do that. The third part of this is if you're one of these believers that says, well, God will provide, great. But we need to understand that God loves us more than sparrows, right? And look what he does with the sparrows. Even if there is something for the sparrow, which he provides for every day, the sparrow still has to get out of his nest and go get it. It's not like the sparrow gets to sit in his nest and poof, birdseed magically shows up in his gut. He still has to go out and get it. Well, we don't want to do that. We don't want to leave our little nest and go out and get what God has provided. And what's so sad about this is God has so much to give us that we're not walking out in faith to get. And it doesn't matter if it's money, or if it's opportunity, or if it's a spouse, or if it's ministry opportunities. We don't do it. And people will get mad at me for watching this. Oh, well, it's all about money. No, it's not. Stat after stat says less than 10% of Christians will actually try to spread their faith with anybody else. 70% of Christians have never even read their Bible. So the reality is that most people watching this are stuck in fear, whether it's money or something else, because they're afraid to fail. And that's something that you're going to have to answer for on the day of judgment, believe it or not.
Yeah, God said he'll provide for us, but he's provided you talents and gifts, and you just got to figure out which ones you have and go out there and use them and start creating things and changing the world and changing your own reality to be this fruitful one. And so another lie that you talk about, and I've heard this myself in the comments and be like, well, I really want to do this. I just don't have the resources. And one lie that you really attack is you need a lot of money to make money. And that's just not true. And so what do you mean by that?
Well, you don't need any money to make money. See, this is the crazy aspect to this. Everybody says, oh, well, it takes money to make money, and you need to invest a lot of money in business in order to start, and it's risky because you could lose money. Only if you're doing it wrong. If you are doing it like an employee who's deciding to start a business, yeah, that's risky. I wouldn't do that. I would do it like an entrepreneur. And part of the problem is we have 27 million small business owners in this country, but very few entrepreneurs. Here's the reality. The reality is that if you want your dream business, if you're like, well, I want to have a bed and breakfast in Vermont like Bob Newhart, well, then, yeah, it's going to take money to buy a bed and breakfast, but it doesn't take money to make money. And we seem to get those two things confused. I had somebody actually use that as an example, and I said, well, do you have 300 grand that I don't know about? And they said no, and I said, well, then don't do it. And they said, well, see, it takes money to make money. No, it takes money to buy a bed and breakfast. That's the difference. The reality here is that homeless people can start businesses. I've helped homeless people start businesses. There are other great examples that aren't even mine of homeless people starting businesses. And in one of my classes, we actually took people out. We filmed it. We took people out onto the street. We pulled over in the car and said, okay, get out, pretend you're homeless, and by tonight, don't be. And by lunch, we started 4 businesses and made over $45,000 with zero money to invest. So the reality here, and I keep using that word reality because we need to get back to it. The reality here is that it does not take money to make money. It takes creativity to make money. And that's something that we no longer teach. I have a textbook. Matter of fact, I might be able to grab it here. I have a textbook from 1929. It's a 7th grade math textbook. And in that textbook, 7th graders are taught when you leave school, unless you're the dunce in the corner, you're going to leave school and go start a business. Well, today, the textbooks are like 3 inches thick or something, and it's hundreds of pages of just repetition, 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 because we don't want people to think. We want them to be good little employees and just regurgitate correct answers. But that becomes a problem when they start a business, because now they no longer have the imagination to do so, and thus the problem of all these people who think it's risky.
Yeah, we have so many people in our, especially our fringe group of that just are anti-control and I don't want to be controlled by the man, and I want to break free from this grid. But then they go to their job every day, and they kind of are like, well, that's just the way it is. I have to do it. The New World Order has my hands tied. It's like, do you want to fight? Or do you want to stand up and be different? Or are you
Right.
really just happy? Do you just want to sit there and complain, or you want to be different? And so, just a personal testimony. I have been really inspired by this book and your radio show and things like that, because it's encouraged me to start a starter business, is kind of what you call it, and then use that starter business to build on a bigger business. And so I'm working on starting my own production company based on some other finances that I had started from somewhere else. So it works. Sweet. Guys. It's real, and it's not easy. And don't think that just because God's behind you that it's just going to be an easy step-by-step process, because it's difficult. And so it takes tenacity, and it takes drive to do it. And so just you can do it. I believe in you guys. But so I'm sure there's other people kind of around listening to this, and they're thinking they have some other excuse. So what are some highlight excuses that you hear often that we want to squash right now?
I'm too old. Usually I get that one. Oh, well, I'm too old, or I'm too young. Either way. I actually started my first business at 12, and I was so shy. I remember I couldn't order a hamburger, so I still made that work. I made more at 12 than most of my teachers did. And also, the too old thing. We just had at the Hear the Watchman, we had a 90, I think he's 92 or 94-year-old World War II veteran who came up to me. He's seen me speak a number of times. He has Evangelpreneur. And he came up to me and he says, Josh, I'm starting my business. And it's so amazing because he's saying, I've never felt younger. I've never felt this way since I was a teenager. And it's that journey that we're on. You'll notice that I never talk about an amount of money you should have. I never talk about, owning a Bentley or a Ferrari, because that's not the point. The point is, are you in control of your time and money? And if you're employed, you're not. And you brought up a great point, Sam. You have all these people who are talking about, well, I'm prepping, I'm getting ammo, well, entrepreneurship is the #1 skill you need if you're really going to be a prepper. Because let's say you survive the 2 to 4 weeks of just chaos when everything hits the fan. You survive. Now what? There's no job. So now what? In order to grow as a society or even as a family, you're going to need those entrepreneurial skills. And I can always tell the people who are not real preppers, when people say, well, I got my food storage and I got my water and I got my ammo and I got my medical supplies, that's it? And if that's it, you're not a prepper. Because a real prepper should be stocking up on cigarettes and even, well, I don't smoke. Doesn't matter. A real prepper should be stocking up on baby formula. Because as soon as everything settles, you're going to have to reinstitute trade. And guess what people are going to need and want? And those are the people that have always, since Adam, rebuilt societies. So We really have to get to that point. But even with the control issue, right now, wherever you live, if you're watching this, and you're employed, the house you live in is not controlled by you. It's controlled by how much your boss pays you. What kind of car you drive is not controlled by you. It's controlled by how much your boss pays you. How much you give to ministry is not controlled by you. It's controlled by how much your boss paid you. Because if you're a real believer and you're watching this and you had $1 million to give, I'm sure you would. So why is the only reason you're not giving it? Because you don't even have the option to make it. It's not even an option unless you hit the lottery. And that's the scary part. You are saying, well, God will provide, even though you're not giving him an option to provide it with. I cannot tell you the hundreds of thousands of business owners who have taken the leap and become business owners, and God blesses that. Sometimes it's financially, sometimes it's with quality time, sometimes it's through business, you're rebuilding relationships. But here's the crazy thing. If you are employed and you're worried about control, then you really have to have a Matthew conversation. Because in the book of Matthew, it tells us there's only 4 types of people. We have laborers, masters, servants, and slaves. That's it. There's no such thing as happy little employee who gets a pension. So those are the only 4 people we have. And Matthew tells us you cannot be a servant to God and money. Not that it's a sin. It says you cannot do it. It's impossible. Well, let's look at a servant, because that's the defining word. If we were in English class, that's the word we need to worry about. What is a servant? Well, biblically speaking, they were not a slave. They were not held in chains and whipped. They worked a typical 8 to 10 hour shift. Uh-oh. They also had to start that shift not when they were ready, not when their kids were fed, not when they were, pleasant to walk in. They had to start it when their master said the day starts. When do we have to go to work? It ended not when they were finished, but when the master said, now's the end of the day. When do we get to go home from work? If they saved up enough money, they could buy their retirement. Today we call that, or could buy their freedom rather. Today we call that retirement. Really, they could save money and buy their freedom. That's exactly what 99% of your viewers are doing. Oh, if I could just save up enough money, we could retire. And if the servant loved the master enough, they could go to the city gate, put an awl through their ear, and take their master's mark and be their masters forever. Today we call that tenure and pension. So we are, by biblical definition, servants to money through employment. But not only that, we're teaching our children to do so. And what does the Bible say about what happens to people who teach the little ones the wrong way to go, Sam?
Oh, it's not good. Not good at all.
It's not good. It says, better a millstone be tied around your neck. Holy cow. See, this is why the churches need to address this. And let's even take another one. When it talks about you should not be unequally yoked, right? A believer should not be unequally yoked with a non-believer. We use that all the time in the context of marriage, but that's not what a yoke is. A yoke is a work device. That's what you plowed the field with. It didn't say an ox shouldn't mate with a whatever, or a believer shouldn't mate with a whatever. It said a yoke. Well, let's look at this in context. Who are you working for? If you're a believer out there and you're saying, well, I'm a believer, did you ask your boss what he's spending that money on? Did you ask your boss if he's a believer? Did you ask your boss if, he's on drugs or doing some sort of sin or whatever? Are you unequally yoked to your employer, or did you just apply for a job, got it, and think, well, God opened the door for me? Really? Was it God that opened that door to be unequally yoked? And then we sit and pray, well, if God would bless me with a raise. Well, here's what you're saying in those cases. I'm unequally yoked to a non-believer, or somebody you don't even know if he is or not. He could be spending money on, child porn or something. And then you're expecting God to bless you financially through a raise at work, but the only way that would happen is if God blesses your employer's sin. How do you make that theological argument? So we have some serious problems in Christianity that we have to deal with, and it has to get beyond good tithing and good stewardship. It has to get back to what does he actually say? How do we make money?
That feeling you're having, everyone, that's conviction right there. That's you're going right at it. And so, okay, so let's talk about some steps here, because as you can see behind me, I got that, very, very expensive piece of paper behind me. which I wish I would have heard this message before I gotten it, because I would have changed everything. But so ultimately, you have people with tons and tons of student debt. You have people who are just trying to, not even trying to look in the future. They're just trying to survive. They're going from 9 to 5 every day, just trying to get food, and they can't even think about becoming an entrepreneur because they are trapped. They're trapped by this. If they quit their job, they don't have food for their family. They don't have any money, and so what are some realistic steps for people? Because honestly, in my personal testimony right now, I'm at that step just before you jump off and go into this business of being self-employed. I'm still working at this office job to while I create this business. So how do you take that step? What are some ways to actually break free?
Well, first you have to create what, like you said, a starter business, and there's a chapter on that in the book. So you start a starter business, something that you can do with whatever you have. It doesn't matter if you're blind, doesn't matter if you're uneducated or if you're from whatever. I like to say it doesn't matter if you're from Yale or jail. Doesn't matter if you're handicapped or fully functional. Doesn't matter if you're black or white. Doesn't matter. You start a starter business with what you have. It could be as simple as helping other people host garages. I knew a guy who did that. He said, hey, you have a lot of stuff in your garage. Why have you ever thought about having a garage sale? And the response was, yeah, but we never have time. He said, well, I'll do it for you for a cut. Boom, starter business. One of our partners at Purple Monkey Garage, his first starter business was going to the dollar store and buying, I think, $3 worth of stencils and a $1 can of spray paint. And he went up and down the street and said, hey, for like $5, I will spray your street address on the curb so people can find your address easier. He made $800 his first day. I personally have done things where I bought somebody a hot dog cart and then rented it out to them as they sold hot dogs. So I didn't even have to be the one that does it. The really key element to this, though, is entrepreneurship at its heart is finding businesses that you don't have to be the guy providing the service or the product. If you can get yourself in that position, then you can actually be working your job and at the same time be making money in addition to it. And as soon as those two things start to go the other direction, as soon as you're like, yep, I can make more if I leave than stay here, that's when you leave. That's when you leave. And then you can work on getting your next business or whatever. The problem is, most people, when they say, well, I want to start a business, they think of something they know or something they like. And those are typically the two worst sorts of businesses to start. You need to get into a position where you say, what do I need in order to get free? Now, what are the 50 or so different businesses I could start next weekend in order to accomplish that? And that's really the way it is. I mean, it's not hard, but it is simple. Or it's not easy, but it is simple is what I meant to say. You're right when you're saying, yeah, there's some tenacity you need. Yep. But it is fairly simple. You can find businesses. And like I said, we do this in classes. The last one we did, we actually had a meeting down in Dallas, Texas. And we had, I think, 10 or 12 new partners in Purple Monkey Garage. And they all went out and did it by lunch. So this is something that's very replicatable. People just are not taught to do it. And I love what you said earlier, that punch in the gut feeling that people have on this video. Yeah, they're going to get mad at me, but that's fine, whatever. But what that really is that's conviction. That is that lie that has been living in your body starting to get ripped out. So embrace that punch in the gut feeling.
Absolutely, guys. It's we can change it, and we have a lot of guests on this that talk about different aspects of our world and how we can change it and be active. But you can't be active unless you're free, and this is how we break free, is steps like this. And so this is such an important episode. So all right, so we talked about breaking free. Now let's talk about going back in and pulling other people out. You have one aspect on your book about going back to church, a new person, and with this new information. And in this world, we love to hate on the church because of how wrong it is and how far it's strayed. The modern church I'm talking about, about how far away it's become, and we just kind of leave it at that. And so you kind of hint at going and evangelizing back into the church, which is really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely, because the church needs it. And whenever I talk about how wrong the church is, whether it's theological issues or stuff like this, it's not your local pastor, right? I mean, he just doesn't know any better. He did the same system everybody else did: go to school, go to college, get a good job. But the reality here, again, is that people who are not saved are coming into churches and they're saying, help me, help me. And we say, oh, whatever caused the problem, just keep on doing it, slap a cross on it, and you'll be fine. So we need to realize that this is the number one missed opportunity for evangelism in the Western world, hands down. It's more than hunger, it's more than healings, it's more than any sort of thing like that. This is that supernatural experience that people are waiting for. Anyway, but in addition to that, let's say you learn this information, all of a sudden you might feel like evangelizing, beating the head of everybody in church. Oh, you need to start a business. Don't do that. Don't do that. There's this expression, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. That is such a false expression. You can make any horse drink. All you have to do is make them thirsty first. So the best thing to do is live by example. They're going to see your life start to change. When you start saying, yeah, I only work 25 hours a week now and I make more time for my wife and kids, they're going to say, what are you doing? Oh, well, I became an Evangelpreneur. Or you're going to hear them say things like, well, I would really like to go to that missionary trip to Costa Rica. I just can't go. Oh, why? Well, because I only have, 7 days paid leave at my job. Oh, man, have you read Evangelpreneur talking about who controls you? So you have to be subtle about it. You have to kind of let the conversation lead them to this topic, but it's a conversation that we need to have. And think of even the power that pastors have. There's a pastor that I put in the book. He's in Texas. His name is slipping me right now, but he's a billionaire. He's actually on the Forbes billionaire list. Nobody has to worry about, well, did we say a wrong message today that might make our biggest donors not tithe? And all that sort of stuff, which is a true story in so many churches. So many churches have me come in and speak just because the pastor knows that he can't say what I can get away with saying. So there is that reality where even the pastor needs to be taught entrepreneurship. This is why Paul was an entrepreneur. So was Peter, actually. So was John and Luke, actually. So, yeah, we need to get this back into the church. And notice how Jesus never, ever, ever condemns the donors of money. He goes out into the world and he says, okay, so this is what you got to do. You got to go out there and, ask for money. But as soon as they give it to you, yell at them for being wealthy enough to give. That conversation never happens. But people always say, well, what about, wealth in the Bible? Isn't it frowned upon? It is never frowned upon if you don't get your identity there. And I want to bring this up because somebody's going to email me after seeing this and say, well, what about the rich young ruler? What about him? If we look at the rich young ruler, Jesus does not start out with, how dareth thou be wealthy? He doesn't start that way. He actually starts by asking him, are you doing the good things, the right things that you're doing? Yep, doing them. And then Jesus says, here's the problem. You're finding your identity in your wealth. That's the problem. Not that there shouldn't be financial gain. I mean, come on, look at the example of the talents and who gets punished? The dude who just sits on them and buries them. So what he's saying to the rich young ruler is, no, Jack. You think you've done everything right, but you found your identity in your wealth. So give up that identity, pick up my identity. He's the only wealthy person that he's condemning here. And then to finish this out, the disciples are asking him, well, how do we get in and to heaven? And he says, it's easier for a camel to enter through the eye of a needle than a rich man to enter into heaven. And most Christians stop there. That's not the end of the sentence. The sentence continues. But with God, all things are possible. Well, so a rich man needs the salvation of the Messiah through God in order to enter heaven. Well, doesn't a poor man? So if this was in any other context other than he just schooled that rich young ruler on he's finding his identity in the wrong place, that sentence is equally as true to say it is easier for a camel to enter through the eye of a needle than a poor man to get into heaven. But with God, all things are possible. Because Jesus says there's only one way. Doesn't matter if you're rich or poor. Only one way into heaven, and that's through him. So we have to get off of this half-read verse and using that as some sort of doctrinal statement. You have to look at it in context. And in context, we see a completely different picture than what we are normally taught.
It's interesting how all these misconceptions are coming back to half-read verses. I think maybe people should just read their Bible a little bit more to understand.
Yes.
And what you said about the church is so spot on, because pastors are afraid to speak the truth, and if that doesn't speak to you how Satan's corrupted, has gotten his fingers in all sorts of places that it should never be at, then you really need to wake up some more. So we've encompassed that topic pretty well. Obviously, guys, get the book. It will seriously readjust your sight when it comes to how you want to be most fruitful in our world. So kind of, I guess, really, I don't even have a good transition for this. But anyway, I wanted your opinion on this big topic that's coming out now, on net neutrality and just the way it's kind of corrupting people. And just what is your opinion on this new movement of net neutrality? I guess not new, but this re-energized movement of net neutrality.
Well, that's a great question, because it's almost like a genie that we let out of the bottle. Whether we do something now or we do something later, it's almost as if it's an inevitability. And it's tied into other things. Like when I hear about the net neutrality stuff and all that sort of deal, I link it to other things that we've heard about, like the battle against fake news. So recently, in the last NDAA, President Trump was okay with this too, by the way. They set up a new division to combat fake news. And they're talking about how it's illegal to put out fake news. We're seeing this in Europe already. But think about this. They said, well, no. It's only international. It's only international news. But if the internet is owned internationally or even routed internationally, then something you publish from wherever you are in the United States, even if I live next door and read it, has now become international because the control of it is international. Or the routing of that signal, they'll route it through Canada. And we saw this with the PRISM system when it came to phones and everything that Snowden talked about. Because they were like, well, we're not spying on any domestic phone calls. Well, they just route the cell phone call through a tower in Toronto and route it back in, and all of a sudden it's an international call. So we have to be really, really careful. But back to the genie in the bottle thing, I don't know if there's any way to really have a good platform for running the internet. I really don't. I really don't. So, if it's of the people, well then, corporations are now defined as people. That's why Facebook has more power than like the NSA. If it's of the domestic government, well, we kind of know what a mess that is. They haven't been able to figure that out in 200 years. If it's an international body, well, again, here we have the problem with international laws and, courts with the gold fringe, all that sort of stuff. So really our only three options are three options that don't really serve the freedom, liberty loving people very well, even though there's a lot of debate amongst those people as to which one that we should go with. Does that make sense, or is that kind of...
I know what you're saying. I've done a lot of research on it because of that crossroad that you hit. You're like, well, the government is trying to give up power here with the FCC, repealing net neutrality, and you're like, well, that's a good thing. But why would a government ever do that? And then you have, they're giving it back to the corporations, which we all know the corporations are and the government are almost the same thing in some senses.
Yeah.
And so it's like, so that's why I wanted to bring it up, because I don't really know how to navigate this and really put forth. I mean, and you have the majority of culture saying let's get rid of net neutrality, or let's keep net neutrality, and you're like, well, normally when the culture is all on board with something, I want to go the exact opposite way, and so it's just like it's difficult. And so throughout my research, I was looking at things like the communication bill of 1934 and the one in 96 as well, and just how the main idea is it was a free market, and then the government stepped in and they called it deregulation when really they were just regulating everything.
Yes.
And so I guess is it possible for us to get back to that free market area with this?
No, and that's kind of the misnomer. I mean, you have a lot of these net neutrality people who think that that's the free market option, but it's really not, because what they do is regulation by proxy. So, for example, let's say totally neutral, everybody just kind of free for all, let the free market decide. Oh, a happy day. However, it's illegal now for Facebook to post politically charged messages in Europe, and they have to take them down within, I think, like 3 hours, or they get a massive fine. So what about neutrality? You know, it's regulation by proxy. It's kind of like being a free-range chicken. Are you really free? Of course not. They just give you this illusion of freedom, and they keep you in the fence, which actually makes you run around more and makes you more monitorable, to be honest. Because if you are held in captivity, if you're held in a jail cell, do I get to pick up your social behavior patterns? No. But if I put you in a big yard outside the prison, and oh, yep, you're free to do whatever you want, now I can actually study you and monitor you better, because now there's a larger sample size to do it. So, yeah, we're about as free as a free-range chicken. I love to use the example of dogs in yards, right? The dog will go into a yard, and if the fence is there, the dog will go up to the fence, realize the fence is there, and after a day or two of exploring where the fence line is, he'll be fine. Won't worry about it anymore. However, if the dog has one of those electric collars on and the fence is buried, the dog thinks he's free. And as soon as that dog makes a run for the neighbor's yard, he crosses that line, wham! That dog gets zapped, right? Well, that's where we are with however this plays out. We think we're free if it stays neutral. Well, really? Then why, when it was neutral, why are all these people in jail for posting politically charged Twitter posts? Why are there these websites that get taken away? Why are things getting demonetized on YouTube? And here's the other part of that. YouTube is private property. So if I'm really going to be a freedom-loving person, then I actually have to agree with YouTube in saying, hey, if we want to demonetize you, we can, because it's their property, even though I was one of those people who got hit with the demonetization. So where is this heading? This is why, Sam, we need Yeshua, Jesus, to come back. This is why. Because when left to the devices of man, we are not going to get this perfect. And as technology rapidly advances and increases, it is going to become smarter than us. Just last week, we had the first church of AI registered in the United States.
I heard that.
With the former executive of Google. So now we're actually worshiping AI. We are creating something in our own image. Holy Hannah. There are now two countries that have granted citizenship to artificial intelligence. One is Saudi Arabia, the other is Japan. In Saudi Arabia, it's a woman who doesn't have to wear a burqa. So this woman robot actually has more freedom than a human female. So it's just crazy. It's just nuts. But it's also a sign of hope, because it has to get to a point where we can't do it ourselves, that he splits the sky open and says, okay, I'm going to take care of it.
Yeah, and the reason I brought that up in a really awkward transition is because you can see the lies are exactly the same as what we were talking about with money. You think you're free in your job, and you think that you're free doing all these things, but in reality you're just constrained, just like the internet is. It's the same lie.
Right.
And that's the important aspect. So if we take the same lessons we've learned from the first half of this and apply it to the second half, that means we need entrepreneurs to step up and say, well, this net neutrality is an issue, but I bet you there's an opportunity there. And that's when Christians need to step up and really start providing alternatives in some way. And I think that's a great way to break free and apply those ideas that we just talked about to this situation. And so that's my point is every lie is very, very similar from Satan, and the root is, and there's an answer to it. And so definitely we need Jesus to come in and save us, but I think he's also given us the talents to find a new alternative.
Well, and that's that entrepreneurship. Mm-hmm. But here's the problem. If we're saying, even if you're a Donald Trump supporter, if we're saying, oh, we need companies to bring back jobs, that's like the Egyptian or the Hebrews saying, well, we had it better in Egypt. Let's go back. Mm-hmm. So we need to get to this point where we say entrepreneurship, because whatever the problem, whether you think it's the Federal Reserve or Nephilim or whatever you think the problem is, Entrepreneurship is the biggest tool on fixing whatever that problem is. So if we're going to have a conversation about net neutrality, but we're not going to increase entrepreneurship, then it's a moot conversation. If we're going to have a conversation about how the Federal Reserve was built by the Illuminati and the Rothschilds and all that sort of stuff, and we're not going to have a conversation about entrepreneurship, then we're having a moot conversation. We are like two cows in the slaughtering house arguing about which farmer is better, but the reality is the outcome's going to be the same.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great analogy that I'll probably use in the future. So we got about 10 minutes left. What's been on your mind lately? What are some big topics that you feel that people are just missing?
Well, I think one of the things we're missing is the Russian, Iranian, Turkey alignment. That happened last week. The leaders of those three countries, respectively, met in Sochi, Russia, to form an alliance. And it was kind of like page 6 sort of news. Nobody's paying attention to it. Everybody's talking about, sex scandals or something. So I think that's a big story. I think Turkey plays a much larger role than what we've been talking about. The Saudi prince using U.S. mercenaries in order to torture and beat the people that he arrested a couple weeks ago. That's a pretty big news story. What we're seeing there is kind of a power grab. And to me, I think it's a little foolish, because if I was that Saudi prince and I was going to be evil like this, I wouldn't leave those billionaires alive. So if people don't know, he rounded up a bunch of other princes and extremely wealthy Saudis, some of them the wealthiest people in the world. The guy who owns the most expensive private jet in the world, for example, he rounded all these people up, kept them in a Ritz hotel, and then hired former Blackwater mercenaries, it appears, to beat them until the point where they will pledge allegiance to him and hand over a ton of money. And at first you might be thinking, well, okay, so it's a power play. He's trying to take over. But I would be thinking, man, I don't know if I'd leave those billionaires alive, because billionaires don't become billionaires because they're really nice guys or they're stupid.
Yeah. So
as soon as you let this guy out, if I was that billionaire, I would start rebuilding and building an army to take out the palace. So that's just my thoughts, but that's there. What else?
Yeah, this is a really great interview question. I know I was really well. That's my bad.
No. It's fine. It's fine, and it leaves that open opportunity for just larger examination of the world around us, and whether it's the Earth is slowing its rotation next year, so we need to get better ready for bigger and stronger earthquakes, or whatever it happens to be. There's a lot of things that should be getting people's attention right now.
Yeah, and people are kind of sleeping. So I guess we'll just wrap it up here. We had a really good, fruitful discussion, and
Absolutely.
No sense dragging it on and making people wonder why they're still watching. So what's the best? Where can people find you? How can they support you? What do you have coming up?
Well, what's great is they don't need to support me. I want to support them. So I want to support them. They can go to purplemonkeygarage.com. They can find a ton of stuff. If you want me to come speak to your church, you can contact us there. If you have a business that you want to start or you want to save, we now have 10 offices across the country from coast to coast with partners ready and willing to serve you. They can go to joshtully.com. They can buy the book anywhere. If they buy it from me, I send it autographed, so that's kind of a perk. So then go to joshtully.com for that. The show airs Monday through Friday, 9 to 11 on stations all over the place. If they don't have a station, well, first, call local station and say, hey, what's up? But second, they can also listen on iTunes, TuneIn, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, whatever. So they can listen that way. And then I think that's about it. Just go to Purple Monkey Garage. Even if you start with the Purple Monkey University, it's only $12.50 a lesson, and you get to learn how to do the stuff that Sam and I talked about today. So it's totally worth it.
I think people should call you Josh No Excuses Tolley, because you give them no excuses on getting involved. You give them no excuses on not to listen somewhere. So I really appreciate coming on the show. And guys, that's it. All right, that's the conviction. I hope that you feel super convicted. Embrace it, like Josh said, and get out there and change what you have. Don't be confined to this set up system anymore. Be different, be an entrepreneur, and be evangelistic, and be an evangelpreneur. it's up to you. That's all there is to it. If you want to change, it's up to you. And so you're not alone. Don't think about that just because you're going out on this new exciting path. You're not alone doing it. You have, I'll be praying for you. Send me a message saying, hey, I started this business because of this, and Josh is praying for you. And it may feel like you're alone, but you're not. You're even more free and in a much safer body when you step out like that. So get to it. But that's what we got, guys. Hey, I'm not gonna ask you to like, subscribe, or share, but hey, I appreciate it if you do. Go check out Josh's stuff. Remember, Hear the Watchman's coming up in March, and we have started a millennial scholarship. So if you are under the age of 29, head over to sharpeningreport.com, click on the Millennials Matter tab, and fill out the application if you really want to get in touch, and visit the Hear the Watchman conference. Well, we have people want to provide scholarships so you can meet people like Josh, and then you won't need a scholarship anymore once you meet Josh, probably because you pay for it yourself. So anyway, head over and do that. That's what we're doing. But that's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the show, and I hope they have a great week. Oh, do you have like a favorite joke or something?
A favorite joke? Oh my goodness. I have a really stupid joke.
All right, let's hear it.
Why did the pickle cross the road?
Why?
To get to the other side dish.
You're right. That is pretty stupid.
That's pretty stupid. I got that from my 4-year-old nephew. So.
Oh, fair enough. Good sources.